All right. I open the March 27th, 2023 study session. All council members are present today. Councilmember Reed is virtual and the rest are in person today. And it is 6 p.m. So I will start right off with study session business. First thing on the list is Sound Transit parking garage update. I will call on Jason and Rashonda.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll turn it over to Assistant Planner Krishanda Walker, who will introduce the item.
Good evening, Council. For those of you who don't know, my name is Krishanda Walker. I'm one of the planners in the Development Services Department. For tonight's study session, we will all hear from the representatives of Sound Transit, who will present the upcoming Sumner Station parking and access improvements, describe the new timeline for the parking garage. They will provide us an overview of the project and introduce their awarded design build team, the Harbor Pacific contractors. To date, it appears the Sound Transit Board approved the award back at the end of February. And ever since then, the contractors, along with the Sound Transit Sumner team representatives, have been gearing up to submit for the design review application, which would be their first permit to begin. So that is an update of where we are with them. And with that, I will pass it over to Sound Transit's Government and Community Relationship Manager, Austin Nielsen.
All right. Thank you, Krishanda. Thank you, Jason, for the warm welcome. It's great to be back in Sumner this evening and very exciting to be here to talk about a project that we know is much needed and long awaited in the community. My name is Austin Nielsen, and I'm Sound Transit's Government and Community Relations Manager, working with our communities here in Pierce County. I'm joined with Victoria Morris and with our project director and John Welch from our contractor Harbor Pacific to provide you an update since we were last here in July of last summer, as we're really moving forward and working very closely with your staff to see construction and completion of the Sumner Station and Parking and Access Improvements Project, or as we all know it, the parking garage at Sumner Station. Today, we're just going to provide a really brief overview and talk about some of the Sound Transit Board actions that Krishanda just mentioned. Victoria will then provide a project overview and talk about the process and schedule as we lead through that design process and ultimately breaking ground for construction. I'll then provide a quick overview of the community outreach that we will be doing in the community. And then I'll hand it over to John to tell us a little bit about Harbor Pacific and their work and how they'll be a partner here in the Sumner community. So as Krishanda mentioned earlier this year, at the end of January, the Sound Transit Board formally took 2 actions to approve the start of the Sumner project. Motion 2023-02 actually awarded the contract for about $50 million for this project to Harbor Pacific Contractors, headquartered in Woodinville. And that was the formal kickoff and approval process that we can move forward to construction. You may recall when we were here last summer, we talked about the COVID-19 pandemic and the impacts that they had. The Sumner project just missed the window to get this contract issued and out to the procurement process before the pandemic hit, and the Sound Transit Board paused all of our capital projects that weren't under construction. So we were very excited that after that long wait for the pandemic that we were able to award that and begin working in earnest to get the project moving forward. The board also formally approved the baseline budget and schedule. And that's really just a bunch of bureaucratic speak for just a basic project scope, budget, and timeline, which we'll talk a little bit about during the project overview. These 2 actions are really awarded the contract to Harbor Pacific and gave our staff direction to execute the contract and begin working even closely with your staff so we can get a plan to get through the permitting process to the design review board and ultimately to break ground later this year. For a little more in-depth overview, I'll hand it over to Victoria to talk a little bit more about the project and what the community can expect in the months ahead.
Thank you. So good evening. I'm Victoria Morris. I'm the project director for the Sumner project. As Austin mentioned, I wanted to give a little refresher because I understand it's been a little while since we've been here to give a briefing. So as far as the project overview, the scope of the project includes building a new parking garage as well as bus loop and bus rerouting. The new garage will be located at the southern part of the existing station parking lot along Harrison Street. The bus loop will also be modified and moved further south to align with the city's request that all bus traffic to and from the station come from Thompson Street in the south. We've understood the Sumner Station parking lot utilization has returned since the pandemic and has now been back to being fully utilized, at least in the last year. We've worked with the city staff to manage station access, and we now have a letter of agreement to use the Bonnie Lake Park and Ride as replacement parking during construction. In addition to that, we'll be monitoring the utilization of the parking at the Bonnie Lake Park and Ride. And as utilization starts to trend upward, we'll work with the city to discuss the need as well as the location for additional parking, which Sound Transit will work to provide. I think one other thing, in looking at the license plate origin analysis for the Sumner Station, it shows that many of the trips originate in Puyallup. As Austin mentioned, the Puyallup garage opening, I believe, that was today, that was actually this morning. And so we believe that the new Puyallup garage will also provide some relief to the reduced Sumner Station parking during construction. Next slide, please. In addition to the scope that I've just outlined, we also know that Sound Transit has worked with the city to provide non-motorized improvements through Traffic Avenue, the SR 410, as well as additional pedestrian and bicycle improvements that will be provided by the city and funded by Sound Transit. We know the significant improvements to the SR 410 intersection is now complete. And as I mentioned, Sound Transit funding was part of that project. This achieves one of the mitigations that's required for the garage that Sound Transit is about to now deliver. The city is actively delivering the pedestrian and bicycle improvements, which also, as I mentioned, are funded by Sound Transit. Next slide, please. As an overview for schedule, we've provided this timeline here. So we've just finished our procurement phase. We've issued our start of final design as of the end of February to Harbor Pacific contractors. As part of the next phase, we'll be working in final design into permitting and into construction. We expect construction to finish around third quarter of 2025, allowing the new garage to open between then and the end of Q1 2026. I do want to mention that there is about 5 months of float built into the green segment of the bar in our transition to operations. So we will open the garage as soon as it is ready, but that is just part of our overall schedule right now. So that what you're seeing there for Q1 26 is our latest date. Hopefully it'll be sooner. On-site activities and displacement of parking is not expected to begin until around May, with full activity on site moving into late fall of this year. Next slide, please. So I understand that when the team was here earlier, there was a little bit of a crash course on project delivery. So we just wanted to remind everybody here about the difference in the model that we're using for delivering the project. So traditionally, you may be familiar with the design bid build model, which I'm going to refer to as our traditional delivery, versus what we're using on this project, which is the design build delivery model. In this graphic, what you can see is the way that the contract is administered for the design bid build versus design build. What that means is, as an owner in a design bid build, Sound Transit would procure and administer 2 contracts, one to the design consultant, which is listed here as the AE designer, and one to the contractor. So they're 2 separate contracts with Sound Transit managing each. In the design build model, Sound Transit would administer and procure 1 contract. We would administer the contract to a contractor who would then have the AE designer as part of their team. There's a couple of benefits to the design build model that vary from the design bid build. One of those being that you can accelerate schedule. So in design bid build, you traditionally work through a complete design. You go through your permitting, then you go out, you bid your project, and then your contractor is brought on board to build it. In a design build model, you get a little bit of overlap between the design phase and the construction phase. So sometimes you can start some early work packages while you're starting to finish design and start that construction early. So you can see how that starts to pull the schedule a little closer together. A couple other things about the design build model is that it allows the contractor to be involved while the design's occurring, which means they're there to provide input on constructability. They're there to provide ideas for innovation. They can actually work with the designers to see what direction things are going and maybe help develop that to make a better project overall. In design bid build, like I mentioned, the design is done first, so you don't get that contractor input. I think at the end of the day, the Sound Transit decided to go with this design build model because they felt it provided the best value for design. I mentioned that innovation that you can get from the contractor in looking at this, as well as the speed of this and the process being reduced for the agency and administering just the one contract instead of two.
You have a question?
Yes.
So who actually does the permitting then? Is he gonna have to write up the permits that go into the city?
That is correct.
So normally would that have been you guys on the other style or?
Correct. We would work with a design consultant and then Sound Transit would likely submit those rather than the contractor.
Okay, well, I'm happy he's doing it. Thank you.
Sure. Perfect. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, design, build, procurement. We worked with a little bit of a different model, which is that we established a fixed budget. So sometimes in design build, you'll set design criteria and then you will go out to bid and you won't have a fixed budget. You'll be working with an estimate and then part of your proposals coming in will have an estimate for that, for those conceptual design and the design requirement. We did a little differently here, which is, like I said, we established a fixed budget with what we call a variable scope. So we set a minimum amount of scope, things that we wanted included in this fixed budget, as well as a list of enhancements. And what we said is we went out to the market and said, we'd like to build this project. This is the amount of budget we have that we believe we need to establish this minimum. However, we're asking you, market, what additional things can you include? And that's where we can get proposals to include different enhancements and we can look at what the teams were able to propose on the amount as well as what could be included through the enhancements. The two-step process that we used was the first step is we solicit a request for qualifications. So we look at design team qualifications as a whole. We work through that process and we shortlist 3 teams, and then we issue the request for proposal with those teams to move into the next process, next phase of the procurement. We did have, I do want to note, we had city participation in our evaluation panel. We did have 2 Sumner staff members. Krishanda's here today, as well as Doug Beagle. They both participated in the evaluation panel and the final selection in these phases. And I believe, as Austin mentioned, and he gave you an overview, we went to the board in January where we baselined and then issued the notice to proceed to Harbor Pacific Contractors. So that was just about a month ago. Next slide, please. All right, vision statement. So I want to talk a little bit about collaboration with the city and the public and how this has come together in the RFP. So back in 2017, 2018, there were working sessions and workshops that were done with city staff and commission members with input from the public and the community to help develop the vision statement for the visual design of the garage. 2019, Sound Transit met again with staff and the design commission to update the vision statement to align with changes to the town center plan. The statement basically outlines that the garage should match the small town feel of Sumner. You want to see it fit into Main Street and the architecture and the colors that you see there. So a lot of natural colors and pedestrian friendly details were preferred. This statement was included in the request for proposals, and our design build team is using those principles as they start to work through that final design to help incorporate some of these vision statement ideals. I want to back up for a second. I think I forgot to mention, as we were talking about design build in general, one of the other things I want to note is that with working with the city staff through procurement, we've also continued to work with city staff as we've moved into the design build phase of this. I know we've been working with Krishanda and Doug as we started to look at design, and the design build teams have put together task force meetings, which focus on city permitting issues. Some will focus on what we need to do for the design review application and the design commission presentation, as well as some of the other more technical things. For the city's participation, we have those in those task force meetings, but we're also working to set up regular coordination meetings with Krishanda and potentially Doug to make sure that outside of those task force meetings, we're being able to provide updates, hear what the city has to say, make sure the collaboration is working well with Harbor Pacific Contractors, and to keep that relationship going through the process. Next slide, please. So last time we brought the slide, I don't recall if the artist was selected yet, but we do have an artist on board for the garage. The artist name is Paz de la Calzada. She'll be creating an integrated artwork for the garage. She works with insight-specific murals, installations, and public art. This is an example of one of her pieces. Originally, she's from Spain, and her work tends to be focused on nature and healing. I understand she spent some time in Sumner and she's met with some of the community members, and her designs are going to be inspired by the local native flora. Slide, please. And I'm going to hand this back to Austin to talk a little more about our community outreach.
Thank you, Victoria. So as we move forward and talking about the design process and how Harbor Pacific and Sound Transit will be working with community and city staff, we are anticipating as soon as early May that we would start sharing some of the initial garage design proposals with the community for the feedback, along with starting to work through the design review process and the commission to get that process and feedback and a timeline for approval moving. Looking ahead to later in the summer, as soon as June, we plan to have a pre-construction open house. This would be an online and in-person opportunity for the community to come together and to ask any questions, get information from both Sound Transit and our contractor. And I will just note, I know there is an upcoming city town hall at the end of April that we will have participated in the past, and we're looking forward to having the project team to participate again here at City Hall in a few weeks. Ongoing, once construction starts, we have a very robust community outreach program and community outreach specialists that are dedicated just to the Sumner project. They will be crafting many of the Sound Transit email alerts, social media, in many cases where it's needed, going door to door with flyers or information. We'll have a construction hotline that folks will be able to call anytime and get questions or have a message call back with the information that they need. Our community specialist, Melanie Mayak, has already been on the ground and talking to many of the immediate project neighbors, letting them know what to expect and letting them know what times later this year that they can expect to start seeing some activity. So we will continue to build those relationships. And in addition, we're working very closely with your city's team, especially the communications department, recognizing that there's no one that knows Sumner better than the city of Sumner, to make sure that we are exploring all those avenues and making those connections so we can have a robust collaborative community outreach throughout the duration of construction. With that, I'd like to hand it over to John to introduce himself and Harbor Pacific to council and the community.
Thanks, Austin. My name is John Welch. I'm Vice President of Harbor Pacific Contractors. We have been in business since 1987, and our primary focus is heavy civil, heavy mechanical, water resource, and transportation projects. So the first project that we built for Sound Transit was Issaquah Transit Center, which is in the lower right-hand corner of that slide. And then the upper left is the most recent one, which we completed in 2017 in SeaTac. That's the Angle Lake Station. We've additionally built light rail stations for Sound Transit as well, and then some samplings of our other kind of more technical work. That right there on the lower left is the inside of a wastewater treatment plant. It's a membrane bioreactor. We actually built the first one in the United States for the Tulalip tribe, and this was the second one that was built in the United States. And that project was actually a test pilot for King County's Brightwater $1.6 billion plant, and it was that technology is what then was moved and scaled up part of that project. And then some of the the more unique things we do, that's Cushman Dam number 2 there on the upper right. We added a 3.6 megawatt powerhouse to the river outlet valve that was existing at the base of the dam, built in 1920. So we do a fair amount of really challenging work and really serve the sectors of transportation and water resources. And so those just kind of a sampling of what we've done. So this project will be our third structure for Sound Transit and second design build. So we've got a real seasoned team. It's largely the same team as that built the Angle Lake Station. So we're looking forward to building on what we already had. Is a great relationship with Doug Beagle and Krishanda and just keep moving forward so that we can get this facility opened up as soon as we can. I do want to say we do want to strive to be very good neighbors, and we found the best way is just a lot of communication. So when folks around that may experience some impacts from construction are aware of what's coming and know what to expect, that it always works out better when people aren't caught off guard. So we want to be as transparent as we can, working through with Sound Transit's public outreach and working with them and making sure that we're having meaningful updates and that people are aware of what's going on with the project. And and being reactive to make sure that if there's things that we can do to mitigate those impacts, we'll do our very best to do it.
Okay. Do we have any questions? Go
I
ahead.
have a question about,
One second. Councilmember Stewart, go ahead.
Thank you for this presentation. It's very interesting. I just had a couple of questions. I'm somewhat familiar with design build contracts. When I worked for Bellevue, that's how we built the city hall. And it sounded from what you were talking about that most of the design work is going to be done by Sound Transit. Is that true, or is it going to be done by Harbor Pacific?
It'll be performed by our staff. Brooks and Scarpa is our architect. And they have Stantec backing them up with all the structural and civil design. So they, Brooks and Scarpa is award winning. They do a lot of public transportation and, parking structures that, they're working very hard to make them not look like they're a brutalist, just behemoth that takes up space, and they work hard to lighten them and make them fit into the communities that they're being built in.
Okay, thank you. So when you did the, you said, was it the Issaquah? The picture that was upper,
Angle.
bottom right. Thank you.
The bottom right is Issaquah, yes.
How did that come out as far as a number of change orders required and staying on
That one,
cost budget?
It came out fairly close. I think it escalated up by about 5%, I think is what it was. And a lot of it was just owner initiated changes that there's accommodations and things that they wanted to see done a little differently. And then your typical, every now and then, some things will pop up that weren't quite as planned. That one was a design bid build. And then the Angle Lake Station, the one in blue there, was a design build.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
You bet.
Councilmember Cole.
thank you for the presentation. I've been looking forward to it because I am a sounder rider. So I am parking a couple times a week, several times a week. And so I was always really concerned about the overflow parking. What are going to be options for overflow? And I was just a little surprised to hear that it was going to be the Bonnie Lake Park and Ride. It's too far. What about more local?
I can take that one, and Victoria, feel free to chime in. We do recognize that there will be some displacements, and as construction, not all of the parking lot that's there today will be displaced immediately. They will be going phases. We do have robust parking survey data that we obtained through the Department of Licensing that Sound Transit routinely does at our facilities. And that data did show that a significant number of those that are parking at the Sumner Station on a regular basis are coming from the Bonnie Lake area as well as Puyallup. So we're hopeful that the Puyallup garage opening today, over the coming weeks, that could be an option for riders that may be coming over to Sumner and taking a spot because Puyallup is also filling up very early. But we do have thresholds in the agreement, in the letter of concurrence that we have with the city. So we'll be working very closely with your staff as we track that data, which comes in monthly. And then we'll also be working to identify and secure the necessary approvals and plans if we need to find some leased parking at a location immediately in the city.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
And I'll just add one thing to that, which is I know that we've also looked at the services from Bonnie Lake to here, and I know that there is a regular route for the buses. We've also talked about making sure we're working with the city if there's a need to help provide shuttle service as well, if that comes up later on. So we do have that as part of our plan in that letter of agreement.
Okay, thanks. Thank you.
Councilmember Potato.
I live right across from the, I'm at Thompson and Station Lane, so I'm very aware of every bus that comes through and all the, early in the morning, the van pool people. And so is there going to be alternate parking for them? Because they would be logical that, it'd be logical that they could drive someplace easier than, somebody in a car. They could meet up maybe out at 24th Street or someplace different. And then another concern I have is the lighting, for crossing Thompson. It's okay at Station Lane and Thompson, but down at McKinnon and Thompson, that's where most of the people cross, have parked or else they're walking over to Puyallup. So, if you could even have those blinking cross, signs so that people are, drivers are aware that there are pedestrians crossing the road there.
So thank you for that feedback, council member. And I know when looking at things such as HOV and carpool, those are gonna be some of the strategies that we'll be exploring as to see how Sound Transit could help implement some changes or directing folks to certain areas. One unique component with the station layout is at the northern side, the northern lot, it's about 60 stalls. It's closest to the dealership. That will stay open throughout the process. So we're going to be looking at a number of strategies and coordinating with city staff on how we can best serve the station during the construction period. So I think we'll have a lot more updates to come
Okay.
as we move forward.
All right,
Thank you for that
Yeah.
question. It's a concern we've heard from the community as well.
all right, thank you.
Anybody else? I don't see Patrick. I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We
Thank
appreciate
you.
it and look forward to seeing everyone very soon.
Yes. Okay, that's exciting. Now we move on to ordinance number 2851, small subdivisions and pipe stem lots code update, and I call on Ryan Windish.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. So tonight we have a presentation on what is a continuation of our theme, which has to do with implementing the housing action plan and the priorities that council adopted in 2021. And we've been working with LDC, a qualified and able consulting company to help us through this process. Ann Siegenthaler, unfortunately, is sick this evening, so you have me and you have Mr. Matt Covert, who is going to be doing most of the presenting. And of course, I'm here to answer questions as well. And so we will be going through the slide presentation, Matt will, and we're going to be looking at the short subdivision or short plat codes, and also our pipe stem flag lot regulations and making changes there to really make infill development on vacant properties more readily available, and also make some of these processes easier, really with the objective of increasing supply and increasing affordability in the community. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Matt, who's with LDC. Matt, it's all yours.
Thank you, Ryan. Good evening, Mayor and City Council members. Thank you so much for having me this evening. I'm going to go ahead and get my slides loaded up here. So as Ryan mentioned, this is the next step in a long process that we've been on to put together some code amendments that help implement the actions and strategies and the goals of the housing action plan that was approved in 2021. And this is the third of 3 code projects related to the housing action plan in this set of changes going back to last summer and fall. And this one has to do with small subdivisions and pipe stem lots and a couple other related code changes in sections across the titles that relate to subdivisions and zoning. And I'll just start off by giving you a little bit more background on what this sort of what we're talking about here when we say pipe stem lots, what a short subdivision is, and what just kind of the goals, reiterating the goals that Ryan just mentioned. So I'll start with the goals. So the goal here with this particular set of code changes is sort of narrowing in and getting a little more specific from the recommendations of the housing action plan. The goal is to encourage single family infill. Sumner doesn't have a lot of vacant land for large subdivisions left. And so since a lot of the options that remain for single family, and we've touched on housing types other than detached single family and other code changes. This one is specific to kind of this infill small detached single family project sphere. But really, if we're going to be trying to encourage infill efficient use of land for where it's appropriate for single family detached houses, how can we simplify the process? How can we reduce costs? And how can we encourage the type of efficient single family development on infill sites in the city of Sumner? Particularly, how can we make it a little more flexible on smaller or more difficult sites that could accommodate some density, at zoned density, particularly, and how can we do that? How can we make it so that smaller developers, or in some cases just property owners, could do this and not have to engage the services of a large developer? Even more specifically, how can we look at access standards and use that as a way to reduce costs and provide some flexibility? And where this led us to is this issue of short subdivisions and pipe stem lots. So currently, just to kind of define some of these terms that I've been using here, city's code currently requires that anything more than 4 lots has to go through a full subdivision process, which involves a hearing. State law allows cities to go up to 9 lots in a more simple short subdivision, which is you still have to meet there's a lot of the requirements are very, very similar in many ways to a full subdivision. It's just that short subdivisions don't go to a hearing, and sometimes there's some a little more flexibility in access requirements. And so the Housing Action Plan, one of the recommendations of that, and we actually worked on that project with Ryan and with the city of Bonnie Lake. So we've kind of been on this journey with the city from the beginning. But one of the recommendations from that was to go from 4 lots to 9, so that up to 9 lots could go through that short subdivision process, which is a little bit more straightforward because there's no hearing, and a little bit more design flexibility on a couple aspects, but otherwise is virtually identical procedure wise to a full subdivision. And then for what a pipe stem lot is, really what that's talking about is a lot that's located behind a street front lot and is accessed either through a shared driveway or some sort of other shared access with it abuts the neighbor's driveway, or it shares a driveway, or some of the options that we're proposing would incorporate some additional design options. But currently code only allows one of those behind a street front house, no matter how big the property is. The Housing Action Plan, all it really said about this was to look at potentially allowing more options for pipe stem lot subdivisions, for being able to incorporate those in subdivisions to more efficiently use land. So the summary of the recommendations and what you have in the draft ordinance that's in your packet. First off, the short subdivision standards. So this is the recommendation to raise the threshold for what's considered a short subdivision from 4 to 9 lots. Short subdivisions have nearly the same process and standards as full subdivisions, but full subdivisions go to a hearing. Full subdivisions are more costly and take a longer time, have a little more uncertainty because of the hearing, and also because full subdivisions are required to build full public streets in all circumstances. State law allows jurisdictions to process subdivisions up to 9 lots as short plats. Dozens of cities have done this. Sumner would not be leading the charge on this by any means, and cities have really found that it's not like a game changer in the sense that it's going to make a project feasible when it's not otherwise feasible, but it does, when you sort of reduce some costs, some time, and some uncertainty for these small infill projects, is that those savings add up. And so, the benefits that you see in terms of reduced procedural hurdles for small projects and a little more design flexibility for small projects really starts to add up over time. And lastly, I'll note that this does not increase density. So any subdivision, any short subdivision, just like a full subdivision, has to meet the underlying density in the zone. You have to meet the requirements of the zoning code. It's a procedural difference, and there's a little bit of design flexibility when it comes to access, and we'll go into that a little bit later on here. But just that's a summary of this recommendation of what's in your packet in the draft ordinance. For example, this is just outlined in red here. This is an example of an approved full subdivision. So this is in the city of Sumner that could have been allowed as a short subdivision. It's just this you see it in this red box here, sort of the upper left side of the picture. It's a short sort of curly Q cul-de-sac with 9 lots. This one happens to include 2 pipe stem lots. You see in the upper left corner and in the bottom left corner. This is a sort of a little corner of an existing area near a highway that's sort of this is a very efficient use of space the way it's been platted. Potentially this could have been allowed as a short subdivision, which would have saved some time, some uncertainty, and potentially some cost depending on how the design went. And that's just an example of how one project, it's just one project, but again, when you accrue these over and over, and the dwindling supply of really easy to develop land can be a real net benefit over time for lots of smaller
Matt?
builders. Yes.
Can we pause a minute for a couple questions?
Sure. Yeah. We were going to have questions at the end, but yeah, feel free. If there's something that we want to talk about this, absolutely.
Councilmember Hochstetter, Deputy Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. When you said you still have to abide by the underlying density. So
Mhm.
this example, I know exactly where it is. I'm just
Mhm.
wanting you to explain that to me. Just like density, like what the rules are there. They have to have such a size of lot or a certain amount of houses. Just tell me how that fits exactly.
Sure. Yeah. So the way that density is operationalized in your low density residential district, there's several of them, and they kind of the differentiation is just the minimum lot size. And what the minimum lot size does is it puts a cap on the maximum number of homes that you can get per acre in any development. And so any short subdivision, just like any full subdivision, the lots are going to have to meet the standards in the code. And that means if it's LDR 6, that means every lot has a minimum of 6,000 square feet. If it's LDR 8.5, every lot has a minimum of 8,500 square feet. And that doesn't change no matter whether it's a 4-lot short subdivision or under the proposed code, an 8-lot short subdivision. So it's defined by the space available, the need to provide access, and then the minimum lot size and the other dimensions in the zoning code. So every lot in a short subdivision, just like in a full subdivision, there's a minimum lot width, there's a minimum lot depth, there's a minimum, street frontage, unless it's a pipe stem lot, and we'll get into that more a little bit later. But all these things put bounds on the shape and size of a lot, and those are the same no matter whether it's a short subdivision or a full subdivision.
Okay, thank you. That helped remind me of exactly how that works. So thank you.
And I think
welcome.
we have a question from Councilmember Newman.
Thank you. I'm wondering if we can go back one slide, but we may
Mhm.
have to come back to this one, the visual. So one of the points that I wanted to ask about, where is the street requirement? The full street. Oh, okay, maybe it's before that. No, the second bullet.
Mhm.
That the full subdivisions are much more costly and lengthy, including the hearing and the requirement to build full public streets. So I'm wondering the difference about what these pipe stem, like access to the pipe stem lots would look like under a short if we categorize as a short subdivision, what does the access and everything look like without the full public street build out?
That's a great question. That's actually going to be in the next section on pipe stem lots. But this is a great question and one that we spent some time discussing with the Planning Commission. So Ryan, if you think that I think this slide deck may not have the pictures in it, Ryan, from the one of the Planning Commission presentations we had, that the picture of the drive aisle when we were talking about the larger potential pipe stem lots. I don't know if this one has it in there. If you're able to maybe pull up that picture while I'm introducing the concept, maybe then that'll help kind of inform the discussion a little bit.
Yeah, I'll take a look and see if we've got that.
Okay, thank you. Is it okay if we get a little more specific about the access for pipe
Yep.
stem lots in the next section?
Thank you,
Okay.
Matt.
Yep, you're welcome. Any other questions before I go on to the next section?
Nope, I think you're good.
Okay, so that's kind of the first big category of things that we're focusing on here is this, raising the threshold from 4 to 9 lots. This is a nice tie-in here because this is related to access standards for short subdivisions. This isn't necessarily pipe stem lots. Pipe stem lots are just a type of lot configuration that can be done on a single parent lot using a short subdivision. And I can get into more of that later, but this is just for all short subdivisions. So allow short subdivisions of up to 4 lots. This is the proposed changes. Allows short subdivisions of up to 4 lots. So that's what your current threshold is to use a shared driveway. 5 to 9 lots could use either a private drive aisle, which is something that was adopted as part of the 0 lot line subdivision code that you all saw and worked on, or a public street. There are circumstances for a short subdivision where a public street is going to be required no matter what, and that's in your code. So if there's a through connection identified in the comprehensive plan, or if there's a temporary dead end on a neighboring property that was intended to connect to a future public street, and your property is sort of abutting that connection, the planning director can require the development to build a full public street to make that connection. But 5 to 9 lots could have the option of a private drive aisle or a public street, depending on whether those thresholds were triggered. And just as a reminder, that private drive aisle standard was adopted in the 0 lot line code that the Planning Commission and the council took a look at last year, and it was adopted. And those are typically a 25-foot cross section. So that's 20 feet of driving surface and a 5-foot pedestrian facility. Some are larger, some incorporate on-street parking. But the defining feature of a drive aisle versus a public street is just that it's a lot narrower. So, a public street cross section is going to be 60 feet. And in some cases 25, in some cases 30, if on-street parking is incorporated, is still less than half or half the width of the smallest public street you can build. So in terms of the you effectively utilizing small spaces, if it can be done and a public street isn't required, it can provide a good option for access on these smaller projects. And that's why the recommendation is in there. And then this will come back up when we talk specifically about pipe stem lots. But the changes would also allow 2 pipe stem lots to use a shared driveway. But 3 or 4 pipe stem lots on a single parent lot would need a private drive aisle. So there's that trigger point where 2 lots behind an existing home could use a shared driveway, but 3 to 4 would need that 25+ foot drive aisle that has the pedestrian facility. It's a step up because there's more homes, it's a way to incorporate, like I said, potentially some visitor parking. There's in terms of fire protection, the length and the need for a turnaround is going to need something bigger than a shared driveway. So it's a nice kind of intermediate option. So those are the proposed access changes that would apply just to short subdivisions. the second piece for short subdivisions here, or the third piece for short subdivisions here is the public hearing and public notice requirement, because there obviously is there's a compelling public interest in keeping people informed of what's going on, and Sumner has a good public notice and sort of public involvement code. Currently, short subdivisions require no public notice and are appealable to the hearing examiner versus appealing to the courts. They don't go to a hearing automatically like the way full subdivisions do. The recommendation would be to keep those up to 4 lots in that same category, so that wouldn't change. If you were to adopt a higher short subdivision threshold, there's already an option in the code for some projects that go through a public notice process but no hearing, and that would be for the 5 to 9 lots if that higher threshold was adopted. So if a project came in with 4 lots, it would be this notice process would be the same as it is today. If it was 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9, it would be this category that already exists, that it would be neighboring property owners would be notified. There'd be notice provided to them, mailed out, but no public hearing for it. And then 10 and above, which would be the new full subdivision, would go through the full public notice, public hearing process. And this is really just, a just kind of keeping people informed. The recognition that these slightly larger projects do have a slightly larger potential radius of impact, and so there's some sort of it's appropriate to consider kind of an intermediate step of notice. With the caveat, there's if a subdivision meets, whether it's a short subdivision or a full subdivision, if it meets all the requirements, it has to be approved. The hearing is there to kind of suss out any strange things that maybe the code didn't pick up, or if there's some environmental aspect that the code didn't pick up. But in terms of just meeting the requirements of the zoning code, meeting the requirements of the procedural requirements of the plat, it's so people wouldn't be, the notice doesn't say like, oh, you have an opportunity to change this, which, is kind of, it's kind of a compromised position. But we think that it's appropriate, given the difference between a 4-lot subdivision and a 9-lot subdivision, that there's kind of this in-between ground that already exists. And we felt it was appropriate to provide this option for notice for larger short subdivisions.
I think Deputy Mayor had a question on your last slide.
Sure.
So Matt, on the 5 to 9 lots, can use a private drive aisle. Now, TYP, is that typical 25 feet? Does that mean?
Yeah, that means typically 25 feet. That's I think the way that
two-way road?
Yeah, so it'd be two-way. It's a fire lane, so there's no parking unless it's wider and there's a dedicated kind of parallel parking, visitor parking kind of within that kind of drive aisle footprint. That's where it would maybe be wider than 25 feet. So 25 feet is the minimum. And some projects, so particularly for the pipe stem lots that would be required to use this, so 3 and 4 pipe stem lots, they're required to provide 4 visitor parking spots somewhere in the project. And so oftentimes that's like at the end of the turnaround, or if they have the space for it, you can just sort of put that on the drive aisle, and then it's more like 30 feet. 25 feet is the bare minimum, and that's two 10-foot lanes, no on-street parking, and a 5-foot pedestrian facility, like a sidewalk that connects to the public street.
Okay, so the sidewalk's not included in this measure. It's just, or is it?
The sidewalk is included in that. So 25 feet for the bare minimum is 20 feet of driving surface plus a 5-foot pedestrian facility.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions on that?
Any other questions for him? No? Nope. Oh,
Okay.
Ryan,
And then this is the last.
we have one. We have.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Brian Windisch.
Thank you, Ryan Windisch here. Thank you, Matt. I just wanted to make a couple clarifying points. So we have the 1 to 4 lot subdivision with a kind of a standard and a narrow access potential. And then the planning commission had expressed some concerns about access to a larger short plat in terms of, you know, the neighbors that live in that small subdivision being able to, you know, ingress and egress, pass each other, driving in and out, and then concerns about parking requirements. So that's partly why we are recommending a wider access at 25 feet for the 5 to 9 lot subdivisions, so that you increase the ability to kind of use the area, but at the same time, you know, not requiring a full-blown public street that could be 50-foot right of way, for example, which can be cost prohibitive as well as just space prohibitive if you're looking at tighter infill options. So just wanted to kind of underscore those two things. Matt, back to you.
Thank you, Ryan. Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you for the additional context. So this is a little bit aside from the previous discussion on like short subdivisions which are almost always going to be in your LDR, low density residential zones. Sumner also allows single family homes to be built in multifamily zones. So those are your medium density residential and high density residential zones, or MDR and HDR respectively. This is a kind of a, I think kind of a no nonsense, makes kind of intuitive sense change to your multifamily zones. So they allow those zones currently allow single family homes, even though they allow up to medium and then higher density multifamily options. However, currently many homes that are built in those zones are on very large lots and are very large homes. And the proposed change would create a 6,000 square foot maximum lot size. So there's a minimum, and then there would be a minimum and a maximum lot size for single family homes in the multifamily zones. And that's what we think that's a little more in keeping with the spirit of those zones, which medium and high density residential zones, very large homes, detached single family homes on very large lots might be appropriate in the LDR 12 zone, but they're not what you might call like the highest and best use of those properties in the medium and high density residential zones. And a lot of these sites that could potentially accommodate more dense single family options like pipe stem lots, or even better in these zones, townhouses, apartment buildings, fourplexes, just kind of what more in the keeping of what's permitted in those zones and what the code is trying to encourage. So limiting the size of single family lots. This is only for single family uses in the multifamily zones. Limiting the size of these lots to 6,000 square feet, which is actually the minimum lot size in one of your low density residential zones. This would help maintain the purpose and allowed density of those zones. Any questions on that one?
Any questions?
No.
Okay, Deputy Mayor.
How many, maybe this one's for Ryan, but how many areas do we have that would affect?
It would affect two different zones, the medium density residential zone and the high density residential zone, which is, I don't know what percentage of the city that is. If I can share my screen, I can show you kind of.
Yeah, I can stop share here, and Ryan, you can jump in.
So we're talking about areas that we have zoned for apartments and duplexes that would be changed where people could not buy that piece of property and build a large home with a large yard. If it's zoned multifamily.
Correct. It would limit, if you could still buy the existing large lot and develop a home on there. But if you came in and you wanted to subdivide it, there would be a maximum amount that you would need to, you'd need to look at for subdivision. So instead of a minimum lot size, there'd be a maximum lot size in order to focus on higher density development that zone allows for.
But you still could buy it and build a large house, but you wouldn't be able to divide part of it off to build another house?
If you did, say it's a 20,000 square foot lot and you want to divide it into two 10,000 square foot lots, you wouldn't be allowed to do that.
You would have to make it into a 6,000.
Yeah.
Okay, okay.
And our code in the MDR, it allows it to even go down to 4,000 square foot minimum lot sizes.
Would that save us very much? I mean, very much space or very many?
Well, we haven't done a spatial analysis looking at the map in relation to that particular requirement. I mean, the intent is to kind of maximize the zone for what it's intended, which is multifamily. We have single family or low density residential zones. We have medium and high density residential zones, which were intended for multifamily.
Okay, well, I still, so if it's if it's slated for apartments, or it's a large, so it'd be a large chunk in that kind of an area. And say it sat vacant for years and years, you're saying someone couldn't buy it, they could buy it and build a big house, but they could then could cut off a small lot around them.
Yeah, which, yes, or they could purchase it and develop it into, 6,000 square foot lots or smaller or higher density than that.
Okay, so they could actually put multifamily.
Yeah.
Okay, now I'm
yes.
kind of getting what you're getting at.
Yeah, so let me zoom in on a part of the city that should be familiar to everybody as to somewhat. So this is Highway 410, and then Valley Avenue comes down here. And I recognize this is our zoning map, which as a planner, we look at all the time, but not everybody does that. So anyhow, the Ording Highway running north and south, and this is River Grove Drive that takes you back into this neighborhood. All this area in brown is zoned high density residential. Our code is historically allowed up to 25 dwelling units to the acre. So the city did not have any requirement that any kind of minimum density, so we didn't require multifamily. So a developer came in the early 2000s and developed about 70 lots right here into single family homes, which is fine, the code allowed for it, but it really didn't maximize the ability to build higher density down there because there were no minimum density limits. And so my point of this is just to say that what we're trying to do now is to put some density limits in there that would prevent somebody from subdividing otherwise larger parcels into large lots and then selling them for houses when it would be more efficient development to allow for multifamily or smaller lots. If that makes sense. So for example, here's high density residential up here off of Elm Street, where my little hand is. That's currently a mobile home park, so this is maybe not the best example, but the code would not allow you to develop that by just short platting it into two big lots. You'd have to subdivide it into smaller parcels in order to raise the ultimate outcome for the number of parcels there. Matt, am I getting this? Is this where we're headed in terms of our minimum and maximum densities?
Yep. I think the key thing to keep in mind here is that single family homes would still be an allowed use in these zones. It's just if you bought an 18,000 square foot, an 18,000 or 20,000 square foot lot, instead of being able to potentially build, if you wanted to, one very, very large house on an 18,000 square foot lot, it would have to be a max. If you wanted it to be all single family, it would be a maximum of 3 lots because they'd have to be 6,000 square feet. So, somebody could build a still pretty good sized house on a 6,000 square foot lot and sell the rest of it to be developed as something that would be more appropriate in the zone, or just two additional smaller. So, so if it stays single family, you're getting a couple more, you're getting a couple more single family homes on smaller lots. They'd have to be smaller houses just by the way the code works. So you get slightly, smaller lots, less expensive lots, slightly smaller houses, less expensive houses, or in keeping with the spirit of the zone, if somebody was, just kind of looking at the dollars and cents of it, say, I'd like to live here, I'd like to put a house here, I can only build a smaller lot and then I could sell the rest to develop as multifamily. So it's really designed to kind of still allow that use, but to just put a more of a bound on that use to make it clear what the purpose of the zone is.
So why wouldn't you zone it for what you want it to be instead of allowing one big house? Why wouldn't you just say multifamily or small lots?
That would be another option, would be to not allow single family as an allowed use, and just have a minimum. Then if the lot was small enough, that might be the highest and best use, because the area we're talking about is, my little hands running around here. This is medium density residential, the green cross-hatched areas. And some of these, like this, is Elm Valley Apartments. So it's a large lot, but it's developed as apartments. You move around down over this area, it's Garden Street, mostly triplexes and duplexes in there, mostly developed, these areas. I mentioned the mobile home park here, Crystal Springs, and then this is a plat that has mostly fourplexes in it. So a lot of our densities and our zoning, for the most part, lines up with kind of what's on the ground. And then some of these areas over here, a lot of smaller multifamily, and then some smaller houses on smaller lots. So there's not a ton of places or properties that are even, I think, open to be subdivided, because a lot of them are already developed or small. But this kind of heads off some of that development that could occur. Trying to think if we've got another area.
So Ryan, is the ask of this council to decide what you want it to be, or are you just saying this is what it could be?
We're proposing this as a requirement or a limitation on really low density type development in our high density and medium density residential zones.
So that's already wrote up that's part of the
Correct.
part of the package of
Yeah.
what you're doing to, I don't know what you're calling it, just improve density. So
Yeah,
that's
it's part
just
of it.
one idea.
Yeah.
I just had trouble understanding it. I don't know if I'm for or against it. I just wanted to make sure I really understood what it was you were asking us to divide up, or that people could or couldn't do.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. And it's a new concept, let's put it that way, from what we usually talk about.
okay.
All right, anybody else before we move on? No, okay.
Okay, I'll go ahead and share back here. Pick up where we're at. So this is the last, I believe the last, yes, this is the last chunk of changes, and this is the pipe stem lots. Proposed changes to the code to allow more pipe stem lots where it's appropriate, and to as I discussed earlier, the address those access issues for the ones where there's more pipe stem lots. So a pipe stem lot, just to kind of to bring everybody up to speed here, so we're all talking about the same thing, is they're lots that don't have direct frontage on a public street. And they are created through the same short subdivision process. An example like this, where there's a very skinny, long, deep lot that only has one house on it, maybe an existing house close to the street. And it's large enough that you could subdivide it. Currently, a code only allows one pipe stem lot behind an existing home, no matter how big the lot is. These proposed changes would make it possible in some cases to have a couple more, but not kind of sky's the limit. And that's because there's these limitations of the zoning that you're going to bump up against, and none of these proposed changes would mess with the minimum lot sizes in the zone. So if you could only have two lots, like a current home and one additional lot, if that's all you could get, that's all you could get. So this doesn't change minimum lot sizes or anything. Any pipe stem lot that's created would have to meet those minimum lot sizes. And so it's really just on lots where you could potentially get more and have it be safe from an access and kind of fire point of view, to make it to enable that where it's appropriate to occur. The kind of a little background on this. So Sumner actually, a lot of cities have some of these, but Sumner has I think a kind of unusually high prevalence of single family lots that are kind of deep lots that could potentially be short subdivided. More pipe stem lots can provide smaller and potentially less expensive lots and homes. Again, not smaller than what's allowed in code, but what's smaller than what's currently allowed there, just because of that limitation of one pipe stem lot. This could allow for more development potential for just a homeowner. So not even like a developer, just someone who wants to, I've got a really huge lot and I don't use it. Is there any way that I could subdivide this, put one or potentially two additional lots, sell them off, and that creates infill potential. So underutilized land behind an existing home, where the minimum lot size would allow additional homes, but maybe current code doesn't, because of the limitations on the number of pipe stem lots and issues with the access. So code currently allows that there's a hard limit on only one pipe stem lot behind an existing home, no matter how big it is. And there's stringent limitations on lot size and building height. The proposed changes would allow up to 4 pipe stem lots versus just one behind an existing lot or home. Again, if all the other requirements are met, including minimum lot size. A one lot, you could call it, a credit. Think of it as an incentive for saving the existing home. So if a lot, there aren't many of these, but if a lot was big enough to potentially have 5 total lots, that you could have, there'd be 5 total lots, and the existing home basically wouldn't count because it already has, you're saving the existing home with street frontage. Lots would have to meet the same standards for lot size and building height as other lots in the zone. And they would have to have the same setbacks as now for pipe stem lots, 15 feet and 5 feet. You kind of get to choose which one's which, except that around the edges of the parent lot, this is new, that there'd have to be a minimum of 15 feet building setback around those edges for privacy considerations, because this would potentially be abutting other people's deep backyards. And so, having just a 5-foot setback there, we didn't feel was appropriate. And if you have a wider setback around the perimeter of the parent lot, which is the existing lot that's getting subdivided, that provides a little more privacy. Just a couple of examples here to illustrate what we're talking about. So in red here outlined, this is a short subdivision that was created prior to the current code, so that you see there's one home with street frontage kind of down there at the bottom along the public street, and then 3 more behind it, I believe two of which share a driveway, and the third of which has the lot kind of reaches all the way to the street, and it's kind of technically their own little slice of that property, but it essentially functions as a big shared driveway, or a big drive aisle with kind of a turnaround here. And this would not be possible under current code. These lots meet the minimum lot dimension requirements. That just currently in code, you couldn't do this. And the proposed code would kind of revert to allowing this, but with some additional things in here, like this top home would have to be a little bit stubbier, because you'd have to have 15 feet from the boundaries of the parent lot, which is around the outside in the red. So with some tweaks, this basic concept would be allowed again, and it's currently not. Other provisions here for pipe stem lots. So, we talked with the planning commission a lot about this, and access and parking was a big issue. And we've kind of listened to a lot of those, questions and concerns, and worked this through with Ann and Ryan. And we think we've come up with some good kind of mitigation things for access and parking. So what we're proposing is that, you can have up to 4 in most cases, pipe stem lots in a short subdivision. All pipe stem lots that don't have frontage on a public street have to provide 1 additional parking space in addition to the 2 stalls already required for a single family home. So that means any pipe stem lot that doesn't have the required frontage on a public street has to have 3 parking spaces. For 3 or more pipe stem lots, so that's where they'd have to build that drive aisle that we discussed earlier. You'd have to provide 4 guest parking spaces somewhere in the project. And because you've got that drive aisle, that gives you the ability to do some pull out parallel parking or perpendicular stalls at the end of the drive aisle, for example. All pipe stem lots have to have driveways at least 18 feet in length from the edge of whether it's a shared driveway or a private drive aisle. For 1 to 2 pipe stem lots that they can share a driveway, which is typically 15 feet wide. For 3 to 4 pipe stem lots, you'd have to have a private drive aisle, which again is typically 25 feet wide, 20 feet with a 5-foot pedestrian facility. Could potentially be wider, up to 30 or so for having visitor parking, pull out parallel visitor parking on one side. Just as an example of some potential pipe stem lots, this is something that we drew up just as a an example of what would be possible that's not possible now. So these are 6 single family lots in the LDR 8500 zone. These are very long, deep lots with homes relatively close to the street. If those homeowners decided that they wanted to put pipe stem lots in the back, you look at the picture versus this conceptual drawing that I put together. There's not really a lot of space between these homes for being able to access these lots. So these changes would allow these homeowners, either all of them or just a couple of them potentially, to do a short subdivision, provide a shared driveway that gives access to those back lots that would be able to access the street, which wouldn't currently be allowed now. And that can reduce land costs and building costs for the folks looking to do this. So this is just illustrative. This isn't like nobody from these homes has come to us and said, hey, how can we subdivide our property? This is just, us looking at where are some lots in Sumner that could potentially take advantage of this, and kind of what are the barriers standing in the way, just looking at a case study here. So this is just for illustration purposes of what the code would provide the flexibility to be able to do as proposed. I'll also add here that we had some questions about this, and I'm sure this is on many of your minds as well, is this, the question of affordability. We've had this question at Planning Commission of, are pipe stem lot homes more affordable? Is this an affordability question, or is this just an availability, just a number of homes, a supply of homes on the market question? And it's a really good question. I just kind of wanted to highlight this, is that pipe stem lots do provide some avenues for some modest reduction in costs compared to the original lot, or compared to what might otherwise be there. For example, smaller lots, not smaller than the minimum that's required, but smaller than is currently allowed, leads to lower land costs per lot. So if you've got an 18,000 square foot lot and you can only do 1 pipe stem lot, you might end up with a 10,000 square foot lot and an 8,000 square foot lot. Whereas, if it's in the LDR 6 zone, you could get 3 homes there. So that's, 6,000 square feet each. That's, sort of less land per lot. There's some little bit of savings there. There's also some savings of these narrower access options it's less material, it costs less to build than a public street. And you can spread the costs over more lots. So these aren't like gonna make or break a project kind of costs, but they can, they can help defray some, so they might be cheaper than they otherwise would have been. So it's not affordable, what you might think of as like affordable homes, but they are cheaper than they otherwise would have been, and it kind of bends that cost curve down. And then lastly, just the issue of adding more infill. The reason why some infill sites don't get developed is because they're difficult, right? There's constraints, there's just geometry issues with the lots, or issues with the code where you can't do the kind of access you want. And there's just not a lot of really easy to develop land left. And so adding the ability to do more of this, adding single family flexibility in some of these sites can produce more supply and kind of bend that cost curve down. So you're not like making homes dramatically cheaper, but you're making them less expensive than they otherwise would have been. And that, it's not like a huge bell ringing kind of victory, but it is a win. So any questions on that before I just go through this last couple of points, if folks have any questions?
Charlotte? No? Councilmember Brown, do you have any questions? No? Councilmember Potato, you good? We're good.
Okay. And then lastly, this was a really interesting question from the Planning Commission. I just wanted to share this with you as well, with you all. The question was kind of, how many of these things could you get? Is this going to just result in like a feeding frenzy of pipe stem lots? Like how many could you actually do in Sumner? And obviously it's tough to do a like a really detailed feasibility on like every single lot that potentially has capacity. So we kind of took a couple existing data points and looked at some existing product that's been built recently and kind of just made some common sense assumptions about the data, and looking at how much development capacity the county says that Sumner has from the last buildable lands data. The county says that that there's a total of potentially up to 446 units of housing capacity in all of the low density residential zones in Sumner. So that's the not vacant, but lots that are way too big for the underlying zoning. So that's not to say that all of them would potentially redevelop. Sometimes the home is right in the middle of the lot, or there's kind of an unmapped wetland or something that's going to get in the way. But just kind of looking at lot size and market readiness and stuff, the county looked at this and they said, we think you have 446 units of underutilized capacity. So lots that have something on them, they aren't vacant, but they could potentially have additional lots. Many of these underutilized lots could potentially add one pipe stem lot now under current code. The proposed code changes would enable some of those, but not all of them, to add more than one pipe stem lot. Again, it depends on the underlying zoning and the dimensions and the size and the access of the current lot, but some of them could have more than one pipe stem lot under the proposed code. So what we did was we looked at recent residential subdivisions, the prevalence of pipe stem lots in those subdivisions, and kind of looked at, okay, we found that 5 to 10% of lots in some recent subdivisions in the city were pipe stem lots. Assuming that you could maybe get that to roughly double, so on average, spread across a bunch of different projects, you might get 10 to 15-ish% of the lots in, maybe up to 20% in some cases in a subdivision being pipe stem lots. What would that do? And so we looked at the availability of land and the kind of the recent building product and just some assumptions. We think that our kind of back of the envelope calculation on this, our best guess is there's probably a few dozen of these that could be built, maybe 50 to 60 citywide. And that's over the kind of the planning period, right? So, you're looking out 20 years. So 50 to 60 lots it's not nothing, but it's not an overwhelming number of new lots or new units. And so we really think of this as like it'll enable some lots to develop to add more infill, just because of the limitations of the current code. Others, it might not make a difference, and that's okay. But really, it's an opportunity to provide some more flexibility and get, you know, a meaningful number of new units that are on kind of tough to develop infill sites that that might not otherwise be built because code doesn't currently allow it. So that was kind of our you know, best guess at, you know, is this an affordability issue? How many of these could you actually get, and sort of what does the proposed code do? And you know, kind of went through all the, you know, what would this do and what would this change? But you know, big picture impact wise, definitely not an overwhelming number of new homes, but not nothing either. And I think we would think it's worth taking a look at. And that's all that I have. And so if anybody has any last questions, or you know, happy to Ryan and I can answer any big picture questions, or if folks have questions about the draft ordinance in your packet, I'm happy to answer those.
Councilmember Newman.
Sorry, this isn't really a policy question, but more of a market one. So if some landowners took advantage of the changes in code, do you expect, accessibility wise, it doesn't matter, but I'm curious about, do you think would they then become available on the rental market, or do you think owners would do it like to sell property behind it? Any indication, like for other cities where they have like switched over, like what that ended up looking like?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what we've seen just kind of region wide is that the for pipe stem lots and short subdivisions is that these kind of infill smaller single family lots are rented out at probably pretty close to the same rate as single family homes currently, you know, so there's not a huge difference because they're I mean, they're still single family homes, they're still, you know, fee simple ownership, they still own the lot and the home. And these homes are, you know, like I said, these aren't like something you might think of as an affordable home. These are still going to, you know, if under current code you could build, you know, you could subdivide 2 lots and have them be, you know, they'd both be like $1 million a piece. These might be 900,000 or 850. You know, with those kind of shaving off some of those like land and access, you know, frontage improvement type costs. And so, you know, these are not cheap homes, or, you know, if they're 750, they might be 675 or 700, you know, so it's they're not cheap. And so they're pretty close to market rate. And so the behavior is likely going to be very similar to single family homes currently, which is, you know, there are, you know, probably in the, I don't know what it is for Sumner, but I think region wide, it's, you know, it's somewhere in the single digits to close to 10% of single family homes are rented out at some point in like a 5-year span. So it's not a ton, but it does happen. I don't think that's any different for these kind of infill single family lots. You know, condos are a different story, but when you start getting these expensive homes where you own the lot, the behavior tends to mimic a lot of existing single family elsewhere. I also think that if you're talking about like either very small developers or single homeowners trying to, you know, sell off part of their land to get another home or two built on it, those folks usually aren't in the property management business. And so usually what ends up happening is they would just, you know, either they'd do they'd, you know, apply for the subdivision and kind of engage an architect or a civil engineering firm or something to do the drawings, and then the other homes would just get sold to somebody, and whoever lived in them would live in them. You know, kind of like if you owned an old farm site and it, you know, got annexed and you went through, you know, subdivision and all the lot, you sold off the property. So I don't think I think the behavior is going to be pretty similar rent out wise and develop, you know, manage it versus sell it wise as existing single family.
You got Patrick?
Yeah. Are you done? Yeah. Councilmember Reed. What is it?
That's just pointing at his face.
No.
I had no questions. I was just,
Okay. All right. Anybody up here? No. Nope.
Oh, that's right.
Thank you. That's it. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. Thanks for your time and attention today.
Council, this is on the April 17th agenda for your consideration. Are you comfortable with moving it forward to a regular council meeting? Do you want more time? Or what's your pleasure?
Are you saying it's scheduled to be voted on April 17th?
Correct.
So that's how many meetings away?
It'd be 2 regular council meetings away. We'd have
Study session.
it's not scheduled to come back to another study session. It's scheduled to go straight to a regular council meeting. So
Okay.
want to gauge your comfortableness with that.
I thought it was really clear.
Okay,
Anybody
so
else?
we will keep this on the 17th. If you have any questions that come
Alright.
up, feel free to reach out to Ann or Ryan. They're happy to answer them.
Thank you all. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay, one last thing. Cemetery building update. We have Associate City Engineer Elisa is back there, but today we're going to hear from Engineering Assistant Drew McCarty. It looks like Cassandra maybe.
Cassandra, come up. I don't know, I think this is your first time? This is Drew's first time presenting to council. So Drew's been with the city for probably 6 months. 6 months now. She's one of our engineering specialists or assistant engineer. Yep, go ahead and turn that mic on. She'll be giving you an update on the cemetery facility project.
Yep, for you that don't know me, my name is Drew McCarty, engineering assistant. And I'm here tonight to give you an update on our cemetery facility project and kind of where we're at right now and where we're going. So first of all, I'm going to be going over our existing facilities and conditions, changes to the conceptual plan, our current design status, our cemetery building design, and then our cost and financing options. As many of you probably remember, our existing cemetery facility has a lot of challenges. As you can see on the pictures to your right, them trying to fit all their equipment into the building is a challenge. They have to fit everything in there every single night when they leave, so it's not vandalized or stolen. And then just on a day-to-day activity, they don't have a lot of room for extra storage when it comes to any special projects or doing anything extra. Couple more pictures here. That top one is them parking their city trucks in the facility. They have to park them like right next to their storage wall, so having to pull those trucks out to even get into there. Bottom 2 pictures, bottom right is their break room. They don't have any running water, no sink. And then to the left is their restroom, where there's a nice crack in the CMU wall, at one point showing daylight. Moving on to the parks facility. The parks crew was out at the golf course facility in there. It's kind of like a big pole barn. They're storing stuff on the ground where it's, gravel and dirt. And then their break room is, you can kind of see that bottom left picture, just a large table. That's where they eat their lunch and do their work. And then their restrooms is a honey bucket. Along with those conditions, they're also having to deal with flooding, any rodents, theft and vandalism as well. And then this next slide is just a good picture on what their offices look like on Fridays. If there's going to be any heavy rain, their entire building floods. They're just protecting their stuff. Currently, our parks crew is out at our wastewater treatment facility. This picture is showing an aerial view of the wastewater treatment facility, and then that blue-green box is kind of where the parks team is hanging out right now. They have some job site trailers and they're able to store all their equipment there currently. This is just a temporary location. it can't be a forever location due to any future expanding of the wastewater treatment facility. And then again, them just working out of job trailers. So originally, our overall facility plan was we had the existing cemetery facility, which is out there right now. We had the existing parks facility out at the golf course. And then we had the existing police evidence storage as well. And then that bottom one is the existing operations facility. From the existing cemetery facility, we didn't have any upgrade, or we had upgrades that needed to be done, but we didn't have any funding or no action that was going to be taken. And then the parks, police storage, and operations crew were all going to go to the new operations facility. And then we had some new information come about within this plan. First of all, the White River project will eliminate the parks facility and it will eliminate the police evidence storage, which will be done by mid-2024. We will no longer have those facilities. Secondly, the operations facility was delayed until 2026 after the golf course sale. And then thirdly, the new operations facility was scaled down a bit due to a property owner not wanting to sell their property, which then provided us the opportunity to upgrade the cemetery building. So currently, our final overall facility plan is we have, if you look at the now column, we currently have an existing cemetery facility. We have the existing police storage facility. We have our parks crew currently at the wastewater treatment facility. And then we have our current existing operations facility. If you look at that middle column, by 2024, due to the White River project, we need to have the new cemetery building. And then we have the existing cemetery building, which will house police storage. And then parks will either fit into that existing or that new cemetery building. And then by 2026, we will have our new operations facility, which then we can route our parks crew to there. And then our existing operations facility crew will go to the new operations facility. This is just a little floor plan of what our new cemetery facility is going to look like. It's about 4,800 square feet. It's going to have a ground level that includes an office, break room, restrooms that have showers and lockers, and then a large storage area for all their equipment. And then a second smaller level is just a mezzanine level, which will house the IT room and any mechanical equipment for the building. This is also our new cemetery facility. It's going to have an exterior fence and it's going to go around both buildings. You can kind of see that red line. That's the new exterior fence that will go in. New building and existing building are blocked out right there. And it'll include manual and automatic gates so we can lock it up every time the crews leave. There will also be interior fencing included in this plan for the existing building to help meet the needs of the police evidence storage, and then a new septic design as well. And so what have we done so far? Back in January 2022 is when we brought the previous update to council. September 2022 is when we started design for the cemetery facility. And then right now we have completed design for the cemetery and we're in the process of permitting. And then May 2023, we would like to advertise for construction. And July 2023 is when we'd like construction to begin, and then to have our new cemetery building by mid 2024. So our current cost estimate right now, design total is $89,000. And our current construction total is 2.8 million. That includes site and building development, which is about 1.9 million. Furniture and equipment, which is about 200,000. Construction management, which is about 228,000. Tax, which is about 209,000, and a 10% contingency, which is about 250,000. Putting the entire project total at 2.9 million. My next slide here is our financing options, and I'll pass it over to Cassandra.
Thank you, Drew. Cassandra Raymond, your Chief Financial Officer. One of the things I was tasked with was to provide some options for funding of this project as well as a staff recommendation. When we look at this, we really do want to look at all of our options in order to maximize the use of our cash reserves as well as maximizing the use of our debt capacity. So we identified several different options. The first one is just very simple, utilize general fund balance. It's quick and easy. There's no issuance costs. The funds are immediately available. We have the capacity, although it would utilize a good percentage of our unobligated fund balance. So it reduces the flexibility in our fund balance. It also reduces the availability of our liquid assets. So that's cash that we're able to immediately access. We're always taking a look at the availability of our liquid assets, especially economic variability, volatility, as well as some big projects that we have coming up. There are no financing costs associated with that. We would have opportunity cost in that as we use cash out of our general fund for one item, we're going to lose opportunity cost to use it on others. The other option that we looked at was issuing debt. We actually looked at a couple of different iterations of this. Really, the best one that fits this scenario is called a private placement. This is where we work with a placement agent to issue general obligation debt. So this is non-voted council managed debt. And the placement agent develops a proposal and shops it around to funding partners. And then we review, evaluate, and we take really what the most attractive option is for us. It's a relatively flexible maturity structure. I have already reached out and got some tentative numbers based on a 10-year maturity. It's a known process. This is the same process we used for the conduit debt we issued for 136 and Valentine. Some cons, it does have a longer issuance period. It would take between 3 and 4 months to issue. And there's a higher upfront cost. We do have debt issuance costs for both bond counsel. So that is legal services. It's very specialized legal services to ensure that our general obligation debt is meeting all the tax requirements and funding requirements, as well as the fee for the placement agent. For this particular dollar amount, we would be looking between $30,000 and $35,000 in placement costs. We've also talked about doing a combination. Do we access a portion of our cash reserves and then issue a smaller amount of debt service? That still will impact the flexibility of our general fund and require an issuance process, but it does kind of balance that, reducing the fixed cost of debt versus using our liquid reserves. We would still have the same issuance cost, whether for a bond counsel and a placement agent. The final option that we looked at, frankly, is grant funds. Are there grant funds out there that we could use to conserve our city resources? Unfortunately, this is not a project that would score high or really compete well if we were even able to find a grant program that would be applicable to this. So we've had a fair amount of conversations internally, and really what our recommendation is to move forward with a private placement. We would look at retaining a private placement agent and bond counsel. We could do that in April. What would come before City Council is a delegation authority ordinance. This would be an ordinance setting out the terms and conditions of what council authorizes as far as issuing debt, and then empowering staff to issue the debt based within those terms and conditions that council would authorize. That would come to Finance Committee at its May meeting and come to City Council mid-May for approval. We would issue the debt in July, which would dovetail with beginning that construction. Again, we would be looking on a private placement of about $30,000 to $35,000 in placement cost, in issuance cost, and then just a very preliminary kind of an estimate of what the debt service could look like over a 10-year period is probably between $350,000 and $380,000 annually. Because this is cemetery, this would be a general fund cost. The general fund has the capacity to absorb that debt service. We do have about $750,000 annually programmed in for potential debt service related to the operations facility that this would be applied to as we continue to kind of refine and work on that funding plan for the ops facility. I'm happy to answer any questions on the financing.
Councilmember Botetto.
So I'm just, this will be at the cemetery? it wouldn't be out at the new location for the operations. Okay.
Anybody else? Deputy Mayor?
What kind of rates do cities pay when they are getting money like that?
So we would be looking, so right now, I reached out to the gentleman who acted as our placement agent on 136 and Valentine, and we would be looking anywhere between 4% and 6%. The rates have actually been dropping somewhat on the basis points, so it could be closer to the 4% mark.
Sounds pretty good to me.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Oh, okay.
It's
Oh,
Patrick.
Patrick, there you are. Go ahead, Patrick.
Thank you, Mayor. Hey, Cassandra, I just had a question. This was our less expensive plan as opposed to pushing forward with the purchase of the property for the operations center, because it did some combination of the different uses. Does that still, this new valuation still keep that as the lesser cost option versus what we were looking at originally by placing everything at the operations center?
Mr. Reed, this is Jason. It's actually probably about the same cost. It might be a little bit cheaper to go this route. What we are really challenged with is timing more than anything else, because we have our parks in a temporary location. And then we have our police storage unit that is in the way of the White River Restoration Project. And because of the escalating costs of the operations facility, we weren't able to move forward with that right now. Therefore, we have to find a solution to the police issue, the parks issue, and then long-term, we have the cemetery building issue that we had to deal with. So we found this, if we go back to last year, we brought this to council. This was one of those options that we could look at to solve multiple problems in one swoop. Cost savings, probably negligible at this point.
Okay, and not, well, and I know things have gotten a lot more expensive since we talked about this the first time as being a potential cost saving measure, but I do like the private placement and I agree with the recommendations if for what that's worth.
Thank you. Anybody else? Mr. Stewart?
Thank you. Very good presentation. It's shocking to me to see all those pictures that are like that. That just burns my stomach to think that people have to work in those conditions. So I love the project. I really support this. I'm curious, Cassandra, does this, what does this mean to the average homeowner if we fund it this way?
So there's really no direct impact to the average homeowner. We're not looking at any kind of an assessment out to the homeowners. What this does is this would utilize funding that's in the general fund. So it's utilizing our fund balance in the general fund. So there's no assessment, there's no property tax assessment, there's no kind of levy. Really, it's opportunity cost. You know, we're saying that this is a priority, and so we're going to utilize some of our reserves for this.
But if we go with this private, I want to make sure I understand it. With the private placement, it's GO bonds, so we're buying bonds or we're selling bonds.
Yes.
And so that money just comes out of the air and it doesn't affect the taxpayers?
This comes out of our existing reserve, so there's no additional impact to the taxpayers.
Oh, cool. Thanks.
I like being
We're
able to say
expecting that,
that.
were you? We planned for it.
Okay. Go ahead.
I'm totally behind your plan on that funding and also the location of it being at the cemetery. So I'd like to see us to be able to move forward as fast as we could.
Thank you.
All right. We good? Okay, thank you. Nice job, Drew.
Thank you, council. So, Mr. Raymond will start working on the financing piece of this, and Public Works will get it out to bid. So thank you.
Okay, moving on to city administrator report.
Thank you, Mayor. Just one thing tonight. It is Daffodil Parade on Saturday. Our contractor is working hard to get the route clear and ready for the parade. Obviously, it's gonna look a little bit different in the staging area, so we are still working with East Pierce Fire and Rescue as to where the Kenworth will be on Saturday. But I do have a time, if you're interested in being on the Kenworth, 2 o'clock in the area of Maple and Cherry. We'll look for an email from Lana Hoover later this week with a definitive location where you can find that fire truck. But I'm confident, even if you don't see your email, you'll find it. It's down there. So 2 o'clock. Parade starts at 2:30 downtown. If you have people that are interested in volunteering, they can also reach out to Lana Hoover. We're in need of some more folks to help us man the parade route. And that's all I have.
All right. Do we have any council meeting agenda problems or anything? Nothing? Committee meeting? Oh, Mr. Reed. Go ahead, Patrick.
Thank you, Mayor. Just an update. I know the last couple of weeks have been a little challenging for me to either get in person or to get on right at 6 o'clock. Although I was on tonight, I transitioned directly over just after the first presentation on the Sound Transit. My current schedule is probably going to last a couple more weeks like that, so I'll do my best to juggle that.
Thank you. Okay, any committee issues? Nope, seeing none. No executive session? Okay, at 7:45, we are adjourned.